Well, I don't know if you noticed, but there's a lot of words about happiness and joy in our psalms and our hymns so far. And I hadn't realized that until, of course, I was singing them just now. Good old Michael, he's so clever. But if I asked you to define the difference between happiness and joy, what would you say? Is there a difference? If so, how? Or is it two words for the same thing? Well, I don't want to spoil the book that we're reading for the book club, but with its help and the readings for today, I'm going to explore the difference and see if you come to the same conclusion that I do. This past summer, I was privileged to be able to do a little traveling. Tried to pack as lightly as possible in order to be able to just do carry-on baggage on the flights. But unfortunately, at one inspection point, that was not permitted, and so I had to check my luggage. But you can remember what's coming next. Just like a bad joke. Yep, somewhere along the way, the suitcase and I parted company, and for the next 3 weeks of my holiday, I had to make do with a few small purchases and what I'd got in my backpack. Many people were very concerned and worried whether I get my clothes back and how was I going to manage. And as I explained to them, this was definitely a first world problem. While I certainly was not happy about the situation, I thought to myself I could have been carrying everything I owned in that suitcase, and perhaps pushing a wheelbarrow with my elderly dog and 2 cats in cages, and a backpack, maybe with food for them and for myself and other essentials. That is a problem. And that is the reality being faced by many people that are displaced in our world. Whether by flood, famine, hurricane, earthquake, or war, many people have had to leave everything they own or known, had it swept away, and had to leave them behind while they've had to flee to safety. Well, now back to the book club. It's the book we're going to be reading we meet for the first time on Tuesday, is the Book of Joy by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Both of them suffered persecution and hardship in varying degrees, but have managed to maintain a spirit and an attitude of hope and positivity. The book is authored by Douglas Abrams, who, along with a translator and the Archbishop, traveled to Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama lives. All 3 of the parties involved in this project have wonderful sense of humor, and the author says at the very beginning that their collaboration is a bit like a joke. A Buddhist, a Christian, and a Jew walk into a bar. But they go on to explore the difference between joy and happiness. The latter, happiness, they postulate, is contingent upon external circumstances and experiences, whereas joy is something internal that is beyond and above external circumstances, and which, with a lot of practice, can be achieved in any situation. So happiness is fleeting, joy is lasting. Agree or disagree? How do you experience true joy? Do you experience true joy? It seems to me that one has to do a lot of deep digging and sifting through a lot of unpleasant grit and dirt in order to mine a nugget of joy. It's a little bit like panning for gold. River rushes by, you wade into the shallows and scoop up a few handfuls of sand and gravel. Then you start slowly swishing it around, and little by little you wash away the detritus, and you might, if you're lucky, find a couple of tiny golden grains in the bottom of your pan. If not, you start again. Painstaking work. And a friend of mine who spends hours on the edge of a river is always hoping to find that one good-sized nugget. But to find true joy in our own lives, we also need to sift through a lot of extraneous material. And it's clear from our readings today that, like us, our forebears also suffered the same joys and heartbreaks, feasts and famines, and often became completely discouraged. However, we know that God is not unaware of our sufferings, and through the ages He sent prophets, poets, priests, and apostles, and indeed Himself, to encourage us and uplift us. So our first reading today from the Old Testament, from the book of Joel. And while little is known about the prophet Joel, he's likely to have lived during the time of the Babylonian exile, when a large number of Judeans from the ancient kingdom of Judah were captured by the Assyrians. And following a harrowing defeat and destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, they were exiled to Babylon, and they remained there for some 60 years. I'm sure they felt defeated spiritually, morally, and physically. But Joel brings a message of hope from God, promising new harvests, full tummies, and deliverance. His message includes that wonderful promise of hope. I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams, and your young men will see visions. They will experience joy. But they had to learn to do this through adversity. Now, the psalm this morning is the people's response to Joel's promise of restoration. The people are filled with prayer and praise for the one who hears their call and restores their good fortune, acknowledging the gifts that God's bounty encompasses. But what is interesting in the words of the psalm is that it's the intangibles, the mountains and the hills, the dawn, that express and experience joy. But the prayers of the people were heard, and God responded, and the people were thankful. But as Mother Liz said last week, what happens when God doesn't respond and we don't feel particularly thankful? That makes us very unhappy, or it can do. Perhaps we haven't seen a tangible acknowledgement of our prayers, but as the veteran missionary Paul says in his second letter to his younger colleague Timothy, don't give up the race. Paul has finished his race and he's kept the faith. He knows many have deserted him or turned against him and that his life is going to be cut short. But Paul relies on the Lord to stand with him and give him the strength he needs to endure to the end of his earthly life and bring him to the heavenly kingdom. And that brings him joy. So now we move to the gospel reading from Luke, and he continues his teachings of Jesus using the parables, earthly examples of heavenly truths. And in this story, Jesus continues with his theme of prayer, begun last week with the persistent widow. And he's speaking to a group of apparently confident and successful people. Well, the story seems pretty straightforward. Two men go up to the temple to pray. One man is a Pharisee, read person of privilege. The other is a tax collector, read person of lower social standing and in fact likened to robbers and adulterers. The Pharisee thanks God that he is not like the other, going on to expand the reasons why. He fasts regularly. In other words, he abides by all the religious laws, and he tithes 1/10 of all he gets. Well, that's very good, but really, he's a successful man, and perhaps he has hidden a little from the tax collector, which is why he's very shocked to see the Revenue Canada man standing beside him. Mr. Revenue Canada, on the other hand, is acutely aware of the opinion that most people have of him and his profession, and he is very much aware of his part in the collection system. And he is ashamed to even stand before God in this house of prayer. Well, it all seems rather straightforward, really. The listening audience hear what we expect them to hear. The Pharisee and the tax collector play their parts. The challenge for us, perhaps, is to notice that we do all rather like being exalted. We might think of it as the satisfaction of a job well done or a duty fulfilled. And we might begin to believe that the things we do, giving money to the church, doing religious or charitable activities, being upstanding members of society, or things we don't do, being thieves, rogues, or adulterers, really might justify us a little and make us feel a little better than those who fail where we succeed. It's very nice, but I'm sure it makes us very happy sometimes but does it bring us joy? Well, another book I read this summer perhaps illustrates a little better what joy really is: the absence of unforgiveness and hatred, complete surrender to God. The book, A Bright and Blinding Sun, tells the true story of Joe Johnson, who at the age of 14 ran away from home. And despite his young age, he signs up for the army, and his paperwork gets all lost in the shuffle, and no one realizes he's underage. He finds himself posted to the Philippines, where he meets a young Filipino girl who works as a prostitute. Well, the islands are subsequently invaded after Pearl Harbor, and Joe is imprisoned. But the memory of his young girlfriend and the hope of seeing her again gives him the strength he needs to survive just one more day. But he is subjected to the most unbelievably cruel treatment, and at one point is placed in a tiny cage. He cannot sit, stand, or lie down. He is not given food or water for several days. He is crouched in the fetal position, starving and dying. And at the point where he's about to give up, he remembers that his mother used to tell him that she prayed for him every night. And he thought about that, and thought about his mother and about his girlfriend. Well, that night it began to rain, and while he was freezing, as the rain poured in on him, the drops fell through the bars of the cage, and he opened his mouth and took in that nourishing water that his body was desperately craving. He survived his ordeal. But like many others, he came through the war bitter and angry. He got married 3 times, he drank too much, hurt those around him. But shortly before his death, the author, who is a friend of mine, met with Joe, and Joe told him that he'd finally been able to let go of the hatred and pain he'd carried with him for so many years. He had found peace. Joe Johnson had surrendered his pain to the Creator, and he was free. He died in joy. So going back to the gospel, the Pharisee appears to be happy with his life. He prays, he tithes, he fasts. Most importantly, he's definitely superior to the guy standing beside him. But I'm not sure how much joy he is really feeling. The tax collector, on the other hand, is deeply aware of his situation, ashamed even of the times when he may have taken a bit too much. He bears his soul before God. He surrenders and begs for forgiveness and mercy. And Jesus says that this man went home justified before God and hopefully feeling some joy. The Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu both agree. Joy is something that has to be cultivated. It's not fleeting nor reliant upon external circumstances, but a deep and abiding practice, an acknowledgement of the power and majesty, compassion and grace of God. When my luggage arrived at my house 3 weeks after I lost it, I was most certainly happy. But when I come into this place on a Sunday morning and experience the atmosphere, the music, the space, all of the people worshiping together, all of you folks, and the presence of the Holy Spirit in this place, I can truly say I feel joy. Joy in this place. It's wonderful. It's a promise of what lies ahead for us in eternity. The occasional glimpse of joy we get in this life is what keeps us moving forward in the race to the ultimate reward of life in the presence of God. So let's keep on keeping on and not despair. Joy awaits us. Amen.